Thank you very much for a very honest and I think quite thought-provoking, which we thought you would do, Mary. Just a different view, perhaps. So what I'm going to do is just give each of you a very brief moment to kind of comment back on the others, because I want to get to questions so we have time. But I'd be particularly interested when you do, something that struck me across what all of you said is this kind of balance between changing the structure. You know, there's something wrong with the structure, and there's something wrong with the individuals. Caroline, I think you said, you know, if people had made different decisions around the economy, it may not have, we wouldn't have perhaps such, you know, the issues that we have now. But of course, are you really recognising, I suppose, the existing structural economic inequality between men and women that existed pre-cuts? And then interestingly, Ruth, you were also saying, well, it's not the individuals, it's the structure, it's not their fault. You know, and I think, Mary, you were talking a bit about both. So I'd be interested in just a bit, you know, is it really the system's fault, or is this actually about something about men and women have to change, or is it both? But please respond to each other, starting with you, Caroline, if there's something you'd like to...
Well, what I was struck by was some of the good news that was coming from Ruth, which is always a nice experience, because so much of life is hearing people talking about bad news. And something that struck me that you said was that the global financial crisis has, to some extent, been an opportunity for people to think about doing things differently. And that, I think, is just a really hopeful thing. I mean, I appreciate it's kind of, you know, looking for the silver lining, because we've had, you know, what's happening now as a result of the financial crisis and the way in which that's been translated into being a debt crisis, and therefore we're getting all of the horrendous cuts that are still being rolled out. So all of that is unremittingly bad. But if in some spaces it gives us some opportunities for some rethinking about what was wrong with the sort of status quo ante, then that is maybe something to be positive about. I mean, I'm not sure that that's the case in mainstream economic thinking. I mean, I sort of feel that far too quickly we're hearing sort of political voices telling us to get back to consuming like we used to, so we can get the economy back on the road again. And so that moment of actually learning from what went wrong, I think is closing fast. If on the sort of gender aspect of it, there's something, you know, positive that can be gleaned and highlighted and promoted, then that feels to be very good news. And I really hope you're right about that, because we could do with a bit of a silver lining to something that is otherwise very, very negative. And I guess to Mary, all I would say is, I mean, I think the conclusion, because I agree with, you know, just about everything that you said, and until towards the end when it seemed as if you were saying, therefore, no regulation of the media. And I suppose the question would just be, is it not within, you know, the realms of possibility that we could design a system that would still give you the freedom of the press that we all absolutely depend on, but would rule out the abuses? Do you think that's just literally politically impossible or physically impossible? Or
well,
you can respond to that, and also your general response. That'd be good.
Yes, sure. I mean, just specifically on that, Caroline, what I'm not arguing for is that everything continues as it is at the moment. I mean, clearly that wouldn't be sustainable, and I don't think anyone in the media, even Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, would think for a moment that people can go back to behaving as they did before, or being able to behave as they did before. I think the trouble is with statutory regulation, once you somehow have state control over the media, then you're going down a pretty dangerous route. So what I'd like to see is much, much more rigorous self-regulation or independent regulation, where you'd have editors completely out of the picture, so you're not regulating your own. So you've got a rigorous outside body that can impose fines, penalties, whatever. But I think once you get the state involved in what the media can say and what they can't say, then, you know, elsewhere in Europe, there are, for instance, much stronger privacy rules. Then I think that's a pretty dangerous course to go down, and I really don't think that would serve anyone's best interest. That said, I do think the political mood is veering towards that at the moment, so I think it'll be very interesting in the months to come. More generally, yeah, I mean, I think I was very heartened by what both Ruth and Caroline had to say. Obviously, it's great that there's progress in business and in politics. I mean, I see politics fairly closely. I've just been to all three-party conferences, and there is not, I don't think, the sort of same mood of acceptance that, you know, men set the tone and so on. I wish there were more women speaking out on behalf of other women. I really do think that these cuts are directed in quite a brutal way. But I think elsewhere in politics, good things are happening. I'm very heartened, for instance, by the real focus on childcare at the moment. You know, that's a sort of big debate now. And of course, you know, Labour's always done a certain amount of stuff for better childcare. But there really is a sense that you've got to, that the universal childcare is a scheme worth fighting for and worth having. We'll see where that gets to. But I think there are some good things happening which will benefit women, families, and thus, of course, men as well.
Thank you. Ruth, and particularly I'm interested in your thoughts that apparently malpractice is gender neutral, and you had something else to say on that, so perhaps just literally 30 seconds before we go to the audience.
Okay, all right. Well, two very quick points, because on the governance issue in the business world, we have plenty of research that shows that women are more compliant to governance rules. And companies that have more a better gender balance are more adhering to this. Also, that in all of the major scandals that we all know about, the Enmons and that, all of the whistleblowers were female. So, an interesting point. But you asked me to... you asked me just to very briefly comment on the system and the structure, and I think certainly the business world was designed by men for men in the 19th and 20th century, and you know, we are moving on, and there are some good things coming out now where businesses are realizing that if they change the way that work works, that they can benefit from it. And one of the banks, for example, last year said, right, okay, 1 week a month, nobody travels, nobody goes anywhere, no client meetings, no crossing continents, which is a very big issue for women, to excessive travel in the corporate world. They saved £20 million in 6 months from just using technology that is there and not physically travelling, you know, which is obviously a great thing that you would also be approving of. But so businesses are beginning to think about how do we change the way that we work. Their motivations may not be solely around gender, but there are you know, good impacts for women coming out of it.
Thank you so much. I'd actually like to just kind of sit back and let them kind of keep discussing with each other, but I know that there are people in the audience that will have questions and comments.